Hey everyone, Austin and Jesse here, and today we are responding to a teacher who feels like their curriculum is set in stone and their school expects them to essentially become like a lesson plan robot. And we have some strategies that we think will help. Cue intro music. Hey everybody, so here's the problem that this teacher is putting out there. They say this is a sixth grade world history teacher, and their school gives very strict lesson plans. And they have their curriculum, and every day they have to carry out this lesson plan to the T. And the teacher feels like they have very little authority to change a lesson plan or do anything creative within the bounds of that structure, and as a result their classes feel repetitive. So their request that they're putting out there is they're saying, how can I break this monotonous cycle of read, write, and repeat without going outside of the confines of the lesson? The kids aren't enjoying it, and neither am I. So to Jesse, this is a fairly common challenge, right? What stands out to you?
Yeah, it's a common challenge. We've seen a few posts from teachers with similar complaints, and I know even in different schools I've been in, one of them was essentially a public school where a lot of the teachers did feel, they had their official binder. Theirs wasn't quite to a daily lesson level, but it was, by week they essentially had a certain amount of content they had to cover every single week, which, as most teachers can tell you, if your class or individual students are moving at different rates, which of course they are, then there is going to be a challenge there. Just keeping up too. In this case, it seems even more than covering the content each day is, of course, kind of the lack of creative control. And it sounds like from this teacher's post, the big things that I see, it feels to them that they don't have any sense of control in the classroom because so much is scripted to them so specifically. And the other element that really stands out is they want to boost engagement in that, it's not necessarily a content issue. They We can assume that they're still engaged with their topic, they're still interested in their content, and want to teach it to the students, but they feel that this repetitive nature of, you have a do now, you read something, and then you process it by writing something, that is getting boring for the students, and that it's also getting boring for them. And so an engagement issue is the other element that I see. Essentially, you've got your control from admin or your lack of creative control, and then engagement. And then honestly, I think there's a little bit of, what we might call an accidental attitude problem on the side of the teacher as well.
What do you mean by an accidental attitude problem?
Yeah, so an accidental attitude is like, obviously it's not the teacher having a bad attitude. The attitude is that they want to get advice. They're reaching out to their peers on Reddit here. They're asking for information, and so to that teacher, excellent. Like, that's awesome that you're looking for information. You're looking for ways to make this apparently very scripted school more interesting, to make the content and kind of this format you have to follow something that engages students again. But holding this idea of kind of this repetitive, monotonous thing that's getting a little boring, and I've no doubt that it is getting boring, but that attitude that's being held, that it's boring, is also something the students are definitely picking up on. And I think too, really honestly, summer camp jobs, or even adventure guide jobs, that hiking every day for 8 hours, pretty much the exact same schedule, up at 4 a.m. to bed at essentially 8 p.m. every day, and monitoring the entire group the entire time. Or summer camp, for the 9 years I worked at summer camps, managing those. A big part of what you ran into is, like, not only do you have the exact same class, the exact same schedule every single day, but you also, there weren't really planning periods, and you were also the janitors. You were also often food service, and so by all normal measures, you could easily find that job getting monotonous, getting boring. You have to do the exact same thing over and over and over. There's very exact requirements you have to teach every day for each badge. Very, very similar to this kind of teaching environment. And admittedly, like we talk about, maybe it's that hands-on nature of some of the stuff. Everybody thinks that climbing is always interesting, and they don't realize that a lot of climbers that are students in your climbing class are people who got put there and had no interest in the class. And now you have to take this, potentially dangerous or hard or scary thing and make it interesting,
Right.
which
But
is,
and I think what you're saying is that if the climbing instructor is obviously bored, then the kids aren't going to enjoy it as much. And the same thing, if your classroom teacher is obviously bored, then the kids are going to pick up on that too. So you can make something that's interesting boring based on your own attitude as the instructor. It doesn't matter what the subject is.
right. And the point is that you can do it completely unintentionally. And I think that's it, is that like, if
Yeah.
you are even like throughout the lesson thinking it's a shame that we have to do it this way, that's so boring, no matter how much effort you're putting into making it seem interesting, the fact that you're thinking about how boring it is going to rub off on students, no matter what's going on. And I think that's part of what we'll need to change here. And of course, that's part of like what we try to offer is that different mindset, is to help kind of change the way to think about these different activities. And I think there's definitely a few ways to get, as we would say, an adventure mindset in this classroom, even though so much of it is scripted.
Yeah. But I would say even if the learning objectives are set in stone and the activities are set in stone and the pacing and sequencing is, the teacher must still have some flexibility in terms of the words that they say. Like what, obviously we don't know the exact situation in this school, but what would you say, Jesse? What area of flexibility do you think they do have, and like where can they insert some creativity here?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that you could fall into different levels of control. Like you could really have every single word scripted, every lesson scripted. And unfortunately, I've seen schools that are getting pretty close to that. There are a couple behavior methods out there where, you raise your hand with a question, you raise your hand with one finger if you need to sharpen your pencil, two fingers if you have to go to the bathroom, three fingers if you, need to get supplies, something like that, where it's completely structured, to the point where, like, yes, I think most of the enjoyment is going to be taken out of those rooms. Um, and that's difficult, right? That you're getting towards kind of a weird mixture between like a monastic life and a prison almost.
Right.
And I, hopefully we're not there at this point. You might also have just the level where, in this case, it sounds like, really it is fairly by the minute, that you're going to have 10 minutes is spent this way, 20 minutes on the reading, 20 minutes on the writing at the end, 5 minutes to close up, whatever. And that definitely is a structure that seems a little oppressive. But yeah, like you said, there's going to be some flexibility about the actual words they can say. And for me, I think one of the most obvious ways that there's flexibility here is going to be in what you would call classroom management, is that essentially, getting students to their seats and having assigned seats or not assigned seats, or, a lot of elements of the classroom that might be more flexible. And what I get from this post is that the teacher is definitely spending time focusing on the parts that aren't flexible. And I would say, like, to start with, probably two things. And the first one we can talk about for a second. Maybe remind me on this one, but figuring out your own purpose for why you're teaching, that's not necessarily content based, but then also immediately start like looking for areas that there is flexibility, and so that could be as easy as like each day, just once a day, write down three ways that you can be flexible, to start focusing your mind on what's flexible about the classroom. Because it's could almost guarantee that several times a day, this teacher, to them, you're thinking about how things aren't flexible, how you don't have much control. So even just spending once or twice a day writing a couple ways that it is flexible down could make a difference
I
as
like that.
well.
I call that finding the bright spots.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, find the bright spots, see where there is flexibility, and even if they're saying you have to read and you have to read this article and it has to be read this way, like, um, depending on whether it's history or English here, whatnot. Did they give a subject on that one?
Yeah, it's world
World
history,
history.
sixth
Okay.
grade.
Yeah. So I mean, if it's history, you could, you're reading it, but again, unless it's that kind of first level where it's basically a prison school. But if you're reading every day, there's nothing that says you can't read with accents, or you can't, read in different ways, or you can't read from different perspectives, and especially the writing too. I think that like an area where you would have flexibility is half of the classroom writes from one perspective and half of the classroom writes from another perspective. Or, each week students choose a new perspective and they get to create a persona and they're writing from that perspective. And there's nothing like role playing to start understanding another perspective, to start getting more in depth to the history. So if you're becoming this Egyptian citizen or an citizen of ancient Greece, or somebody during the French Revolution, if you have it to choose one side or the other and then start reading and processing and having these discussions from those points of view, I mean, that's a huge amount of flexibility that I would find it really hard to believe that admin is going to come in and say, like, please stop finding ways to make this even a little bit interesting. And if
Right.
you're running into that, like, to some extent, I almost think teachers need to start enforcing the idea that like we're not going to be letting our job become so mundane that we can be replaced by robots, because it's our contribution as individual people helping students grow as individuals and citizens that's making our profession valuable. So to me, like when I see some type of effort to replace teachers with robots, I almost think like that's where teachers have to kind of be like, yeah, we're not really interested in that method.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also want to bring in one of the comments that somebody else posted to this question, which I thought was pretty valuable, and it's just to engage the department chair or whoever is responsible for this curriculum and for the oversight of it. Engage with them and ask questions and get clarity, and then maybe even see about having input on future curriculum. I think that education and everyone should be on the same page that education is a collaborative process, and as teachers we're education professionals and we should have a seat at that table. So even if you feel trapped by an oppressive curriculum that you didn't write but you have to teach anyway, by talking to people and by expressing your ideas in a positive and constructive way, there should be a path forward to having an influence on future curriculum. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah, and I mean, maybe that's a longer term part of this path for this teacher is finding a way to influence that curriculum or influence it. Um, but to face kind of the direct issue of the lack of flexibility, I also think though talking to the admin or to the department chair, whoever's kind of, I guess, creating this feeling of a lack of structure, instead of maybe again this accidental attitude of kind of and I've done it myself definitely to bosses or to guides or whatever, employees, employers, whatnot, but kind of assuming an attitude. And for me, I've found in teaching so often, like even teachers who I disagreed with or thought they were not great, if you approached a conversation with the attitude of like, obviously this person, like the if you I would be surprised if you could find admin in the school that was like, so you're trying to make education ineffective and unfun, right? And they'd be like, yeah, that's the goal, right? Obviously you have to leave then. But if you went and said like, hey, I'm feeling like obviously this curriculum is here to help increase education, increase test scores, increase engagement, and I want to be able to do that. Do you have any tips for turning these specific things more engaging, and finding the bright spots not just in your own day in terms of where there is missed flexibility, but finding bright spots within the school? Like, one thing that popped up in my mind is like start finding coworkers with a similar passion, a similar desire for engagement. And to some extent, again, if I worked at a company where every one of our climbing instructors hated climbing, like to some extent you leave at some point, right? But if you're there, and some of you, like, you gravitate towards the people with a positive attitude towards what they're teaching.
Right.
And I guess, I mean, that reminds me kind of the knowing your purpose teaching I mentioned earlier. Thankfully I remember it anyways. But I when I first read this, I kind of thought knowing your own purpose, and it's true for a lot of the different activities we've taught over the many years, but kayaking pops up to me because that's, and I mean you could argue for climbing and everything really, but like kayaking, it's just not one of those things that's going to be useful unless you're going out of your way to do it, right? And if you find your passion in kayaking and you do that the rest of your life, amazing, and I'm glad we could put you on that path. And for me, it's the same thing as history. Like you're gonna have a handful of students, maybe if you're lucky, one or two a year, that like you've turned them on to the love of their life, and they'll become historians or have a side hobby for their entire life because of, the passion you gave them for history. But more importantly, like in kayaking, you're teaching people to overcome fears, to think, to, in kayaking, work individually and be able to react to situations. And even if they never kayak again, if you've been able to instill some of these life values, it doesn't matter that, like, there are certain strokes you're teaching in kayaking. There's a certain river you're doing every single day as part of this program. All these repetitive things that could certainly be taught with the attitude of, like, I'm sorry, this is boring, but we have to do it. Or I mean, even talking about it, like last night, I was teaching dance. Like, as I don't know if we've mentioned it before on the podcast, but one of the things I teach as well, another type to me, an adventure activity, but various forms of dance. So I was teaching dance to somebody last night, and they kept, there's a lot of this lead follow dynamic, but essentially there was a single mistake that kept getting made over and over. And we thought about it for a little bit. And this person, she started kind of laughing and said, like, wow, like, I never thought I'd learn so much about myself trying to learn salsa. Right.
Yeah, that's
And for
great.
me, that's what you want. I don't necessarily, like, I'm hoping she becomes a great salsa dancer. She goes out, she can go socialize and dance in clubs and look awesome and enjoy herself. But more importantly, like, I love that realization of somebody learning something about themselves and figuring out life and figuring out, and this person's like in their 30s already, and you're lucky enough in sixth grade to be working with people who have so much of their life ahead and are in this huge, like, self-discovery phase. So the idea that, like, the history of the entire world being taught to these super, formative sixth grade minds is uninteresting just because of the format, is too much focus on the lack of flexibility and not enough focus on how much potential there is to kind of
Sure.
recapture their interest.
World history is an incredibly interesting subject. It's all about the epic stories of the world, that, like, how do we get from where we were to where we are today?
Right.
And it's exciting.
Yeah, and it can be that. And I think, what I see in this post is a teacher that knows that and recognizes it, but feels
Hmm.
that some of that ability to teach passion through their subject is being taken away by the structure, right?
Yeah, and I
And
can get that too, because as a teacher, for a lot of us at least, part of the pride that we take in our craft is being able to put together a really good lesson and being able to improvise during the lesson, because the conditions change and students ask interesting questions. But if that's taken away from you and you don't feel like you can improvise or create your own lessons, then, or if if that was what you were expecting and then your school said no, you can't do that, it could be hard to come to terms with that reality.
right. Yeah, and I mean, and we don't know their history either in terms of where they've taught before or schedules. And I mean, I think a little bit of too, like, one of the schools I was at switched from 1 hour classes to 2 hour blocks, and a whole lot of the teachers, the first reaction was kind of like, well, how could I possibly fill 2 hours? And a couple of years later, many teachers absolutely love it, and they've all figured out ways to adjust to that. It's kind of that, the part of the adventure mindset is that constant ability to be flexible and to see things from a new perspective, essentially to keep everybody in a good mood and keep them alive during an expedition. But to be able to use that in a more traditional classroom is valuable as well.
So I guess you would, what we're saying in a nutshell is that this teacher probably has more flexibility than they think, and they should look for the bright spots and maybe even go so far as to write them down and write down where they see areas of potential flexibility, just to get themselves in the right mindset, and to speak with their colleagues and their administrators about this, and see where they can work on adding more flexibility in, or where the wiggle room is
Right,
and where the creativity is. Yeah.
exploiting that wiggle room right away with
Hmm.
creativity, with, perspective taking, role playing, in the writing, changing, even if they can change their attitude slightly towards it, I think students will pick up on that. Trying something new could really make a difference.
Yeah.
Um,
And then just the big picture of, like you said before, figuring out their own purpose in as a teacher, and how is their current situation accomplishing that or working towards that.
right. Yeah, and I mean in the to kind of explain what that means, the purpose that we use is is always in teachers starting fires. It is helping an individual reach their full potential as an individual and as a member of society. And that's essentially, and to me, even you're not really reaching your own potential as an individual if you haven't figured out how to integrate effectively as a citizen either. But those are the two elements that, like, we talk about that all the time. If you're turning out students who've memorized every single question on the SAT and are absolute, Wikipedias, but they're sad and depressed or angry or hate other people or antisocial or, have no sense of self-awareness or discovery, like, obviously we haven't really done our job as teachers, even though we can say, like, look at my test scores that increased, by double digits every single year. Although to do it, I killed the humanity and the decency in all of my students. Yeah, obviously that's not really meeting the purpose, even though they don't do a great job of measuring anything other than test scores right now.
No, and I mean that we're not going to get into the deep end with this podcast about it, but it's all about you measure what you value, and you communicate your values by that to your students. And if the only thing that we measure in them is their test scores, then that's the only thing that they see as being valuable. And that's part of the challenge that we have as teachers, is how do we make our classes about more than just those test scores if we don't have uh, any way to specifically measure it.
Right, and I mean, another strategy that we can throw in from the master class webinar that we created is kind of that compass strategy. Is that at the end, like, they're writing something anyways, and I would be almost sure there's enough flexibility that whether they give you an exact prompt or everything else, you can add a question or two about how does this thing you just wrote about compare to an event in your real life, or make it specific, like how does it compare to this sports game, or how does it compare to your relationship with your parents, right? And, like, you will be shocked at how a single question thrown on in the end of everything can really make students tie content back to other parts of their life in a way that normally doesn't happen, and also helps you kind of create that sort of personal development compass for a class, just by reminding students with questions like that, like, you're not just here to learn facts and concepts, you're also here to learn how they can help you grow as an individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, the couple things, of course, to talk about, like, what teachers starting fires can offer specifically. We do have a couple options out there. To see, like, a quick demo, to me, it falls under classroom management, that if you had to spend 5 minutes a day by taking out, 1 minute of the do now, 2 minutes of reading, 2 minutes of writing, and get an extra 5 minutes at the day and consider it classroom management time. The same kind of time if, students suddenly couldn't find their assigned seat, or they were having a long time sitting down, like, there's going to be
Right.
some flexibility
Or,
just
the amount
for.
of time you would spend taking attendance.
Right. Yeah. With something that can happen during attendance or during grading or handing out scores or whatever, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, you can find 5 minutes a day if you need it, and you can start off the class with an activity that, like, creates team building. It creates interaction between students. It has them interacting right off the bat in a positive way, helping each other out. You can use it to build teamwork or to have people work in groups. And it's hands-on. It builds more engagement. It's something that students will be willing to try again. You could easily do this once or twice a week. And we offer the craft stick download that, like, there's a video where something I used to do with students, and I was always shocked to see some of even, like, the hardest kids with face tattoos that were sure that they were too cool for school, and actively fought me on every learning objective, as I gave this craft stick activity and was like, hey, make this shape with these craft sticks and step back. I was always shocked to see those students, well, I guess, always shocked the first few times, and then it was kind of like, all right, it's working again. But I was always interested to see, like, wow, look at this level of engagement. Look at the students I didn't expect who've always fought me suddenly helping other students succeed, because it's no longer something that really involves the teacher. I mean, for me, like, if you, even talked to admin or were able to get an honest answer from admin and said, hey, can I spend 5 minutes a day making sure that the other 55 out of the class period is highly effective and that students start to care and become more engaged? Any decent admin would say, like, well, yeah, that seems like a great exchange, right? And even without explicit permission, spend 5 minutes of your classroom management budget and play one of these craft stick games. And that's at tsfires.com/stick, as in craft stick, and you can download that video for free. And if you can find 5 craft sticks a student somewhere in your school, or have them share 5 craft sticks a team, whatever, you can immediately start to see kind of what the hands-on activities we used to do with adventure students, as well as in my own at-risk science and English and math classrooms and all that.
Yeah. And the cool thing about the craft stick activities that you're talking about are that personally, I hadn't done those before, but just watching the videos, I was able to understand and like how to do it just by watching the videos. Whereas, yeah, so that's just to say that it's not actually that difficult to learn and to teach.
Right. And yeah, I mean, that's the point, right? Like, it is not a trick. It's a very simple game. Something that I think I ran into in high school myself, playing one of the kind of outdoor camping adventure games that we did. But then as a teacher years later, kind of out of frustration, tried it one day when I think I probably needed like 5 minutes for attendance, and suddenly saw everybody engaged and hands-on, and then I was able to use it in a more structured way to really build that level of engagement, which can make a pretty huge difference in classes as well. Yeah, and I actually we should probably announce in the last 3 minutes of the podcast.
Oh, this is a big deal.
Yeah, it is. I think it's going to be pretty big. But we've taken many of the pieces that build a good adventure mindset, like what mindset do you need to have on an actual adventure expedition, as well as what mindset do you need to have, especially like as we do, to transfer those skills into the traditional classroom. What is it that you can do on a daily basis? How can you think? But essentially, what mindset can you have? And we've broken this down into a series of key points that you can think about each day. Some of the ideas that show up in these podcasts show up in this podcast. But if you want to, if you're interested in what we do at Teachers Starting Fires, if you're interested in that mindset of how to approach things more like we always did as adventure educators, and then in our own, my own at-risk classrooms and Austin's various forms of teaching English around the world, as well as academic concepts, if you want to see a little bit more about that, if you want to read a little bit more about that, we've put it all together into a PDF download, and we are trying to get some pre-interest on that. So that is tsfires.com/mindset, and if you get your email on that email list, you'll be in that first group, as well as get some exclusive content we've put together for you for helping support that initial the initial movement on this project. And I'm pretty excited about it because I really like to, obviously I love to think about these concepts, think about how can we get teachers in the traditional classrooms, I guess basically being happier, feeling better, back to enjoying what they do, and not maybe feeling under attack as much, not feeling like, in this case, that their flexibility and freedom and creative control is constantly being taken away, that we're being crushed by standardized tests, but instead to approach each day, each class as an adventure, as a chance to change lives through no matter what you're doing. And if that is interesting to you, please go to tsfires.com/mindset and get yourself on the list for that download. And if you want to see that craft stick video, and absolutely free, and try that out in your own classrooms, tsfires.com/stick. Yeah, thank you again so much for listening to the Teachers Starting Fires podcast.
Yeah, that's right. And really, the real exciting thing about this is that we just decided that we were going to move forward with this project a few minutes before we started recording this podcast. So it really is breaking news. It's brand new. By the time you listen to this podcast, the website will be ready. I'm going to get started working on putting the website together as soon as we stop the podcast broadcast. And that's how we do things here. Jesse and I, we're building this as we go, and it's just us creating this movement. I do a lot of the website work. Jesse does a lot of the video stuff and the audio editing. We're teachers by trade, but we're learning these other skills. So it's fun. This is all by teachers for teachers. And And that's how we're going to go forward. We're trying to bring this out to as many teachers as possible. We don't want cost to be a barrier. We don't want resources to be a barrier. We want as many people as possible to benefit, because we really truly believe that the teacher starting fires, the idea behind it, that every teacher should benefit equally from their work as an educator as their students do, and the teachers are valuable, and the students are valuable too, and we're trying to improve our communities through the world, and we're thinking about 10 generations down the future. Now I'm gonna get off my soapbox here, but that's what it's all about. It's very inspiring for us, and we hope it's inspiring for you too. So check out the tsfires.com/mindset, and check out tsfires.com/stick, and we'll post links below this podcast, wherever you saw it, wherever you downloaded it. There will be a link to those things, so you don't have to necessarily write them down right now. But that's where we are, and thank you again for listening. We hope you tune in for the next podcast, and remember, you're just one adventure away. Okay, that's